All right. Think we're there. I think everybody's recording. All right. So yes, I turned off the video, Kristen, because I thought that would give us some better audio quality, which is probably what's happening. So we'll go sound only today and see how that goes for us. So welcome everybody to webinar number 5, online workshop number 5 in the My Life, My Body series. Today we are talking about preparing our kids and clients for puberty, so the earlier stages of those sexuality conversations and how we kind of lay the framework for this conversation throughout the rest of a person's life. If you're new to us, this is Sophia from the Yukon Association for Community Living. I run the My Life, My Body program, which is a sexual health and healthy relationships program for the disability community. We offer a lot of education and awareness tools and support for frontline staff, for family members, and for individuals who have questions about their bodies and their relationships in the human world, essentially. So today we are talking all about puberty. Uh-oh, that's not work yet. Okay, we're talking all about puberty. When to talk about it, how to talk about it, and also to give you a bit of a refresher, since it's probably been a little while since most of us went through this big life change. So today we're going to talk about why it's important to talk puberty with our kids and our clients and how those conversations differ. We will talk about when to start the talk, or when certain topics are important to be introduced, what ages, that kind of stuff. We'll go through a bit of Puberty 101, so just a little refresher on all the changes and goings-on that are happening to young people in our lives so that we can empathize with them and better support them. We'll talk a little bit about how to answer questions when they come up, as well as some resources for you, mostly some online videos and other things that you can access, as well as some really great books. Feel free to leave a question in the chat at any time or send me an email, sophia@ycommunityliving.com, as always, and we will get rolling. So, puberty, what is it? Refresher. It is the time of life when our bodies transform from a kid body to an adult body. And the main difference there is that our reproductive organs mature. Certain hormones are released, and this causes a whole set of changes related to what we call our secondary sex characteristics. So basically our reproductive parts. And there's also changes that are common to both bodies as a result of the hormonal changes that are happening for everybody. But when we're explaining it to folks, essentially the basic explanation when I'm talking to a grade 4 class is that it's when our body goes from a kid body to a grown-up body. And the big difference between those two bodies is obviously grown-up bodies are taller and bigger and stronger, but grown-up bodies can reproduce. They can make babies. And so our body goes through a process of being able to do that. Why talk puberty? Well, pretty simply, everybody goes through puberty. Every single body goes through puberty. None of us is immune to the hormonal changes that take place. And every person really has the right to understand their body, how it works, and what decisions they can make about their body. So puberty conversations are really a great place to start connecting our kids and our young clients with their body, giving them a sense of autonomy, control, knowledge, and connection with their body, which is very good for self-esteem, mental health, personal awareness, and violence prevention. So when we know the names of our body parts, all of them, even the ones that are used for sexual activity or for reproduction, when we know how to speak confidently about our body, when we are aware of what is going on in our body, we can feel a sense of control and autonomy. Something that really often happens in the disability community because we have a fear of talking about puberty potentially too soon with our kids, or worrying that they may not understand the topics even though their body's going through these changes, is that some of the changes that happen with puberty can feel quite scary and confusing if you have no idea that they're coming. So in particular, if we think about young girls who get their periods, if there is no preparation for the idea that at some point, one day, some light red fluids are going to start coming out of your vagina, many young women will panic that they are dying or that something is extremely wrong with them. For young men, kind of on a similar note, if they start to experience erections or wet dreams, which are both really common, if they don't know what that white stuff is that's coming out of their body or why they all of a sudden have no more control over their penis, which is a really embarrassing process at school, it just creates this negative feedback loop where they feel disconnected from their body. They don't know what's going on. It's very embarrassing, so they're not sure who to talk to about it and who to ask questions to. And they can end up going down some very interesting paths to try to find information. So when we talk openly about puberty in our homes, in our care facilities, in places that are appropriate to talk about, private body parts and bodily functions, we set the tone that it's okay to be curious about our bodies, it's okay to want to learn about them, and it's important to know about them and how to take care of them, which is a really important thing in the disability community. So cleanliness and self-care and personal hygiene, puberty really relates to all of those things. So talking about puberty is really important, even though it can feel really embarrassing for a lot of us. And I just invite everybody to kind of pause for a moment and think about what that time of life was like for you. So, what was the most memorable about it? Is it sort of overwhelmingly negative or positive for you? How did you feel about approaching puberty, right? Some people are super excited about the idea of growing up, of becoming older, of maturing, of getting breasts or getting their period. Other people are absolutely terrified that childhood is slipping away from them and people are expecting more and more from them and there's more responsibilities. And other people are kind of ambivalent or they have mixed feelings. So they might be excited about growing up and also afraid of what's happening. Also, when I invite people to kind of reflect back on it, to think about what you learned about puberty, where you got that information, who taught it to you, and what information, importantly, do you wish that you had that could have helped you through that time. So some people wake up to a book on their pillow that someone left in the night, and that's about the extent of the conversation. Other people might get a quick and dirty 1 hour birds and the bees convo from their folks. And other people might have had a really great sex ed lesson or just a really open home where they were able to talk about these things, ask questions, and find out more. And that latter is kind of ideally where we'd like to be. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can kind of get there. And the reason that we want to kind of foster that environment of openness is that, like I said before, when we encourage people to know all of their bodies, everything from being able to notice a rash on their leg or, a fungus or something wrong with their feet, to knowing what's going on with their vagina, what's healthy, what's not, we empower them to make decisions about their bodies, to ask for help, and also to prevent abuse. And this also creates more sort of self-esteem and autonomy in a person when they feel they have kind of an awareness of their body. So it's all really linked, and it also is where we sort of sow the seeds for sex positivity, which means we lay the foundation that it's okay to talk about sexuality issues. It's okay to ask about vaginas and penises in private places with respectful people who are trusted advisors and have the right information for us. And that sows the seeds for folks as they get older and they start to have more questions about how sex happens or how relationships happen or what to do with crushes. And when we give people an open way of communicating about that, we give them a trusted resource so that they can get information from the right places instead of experimenting and looking for those answers on their own, which can lead them to some very interesting paths sometimes. So feel free to put any questions in the chat at any time, or you can send me an email. We are talking about puberty today on the My Life, My Body workshop. So when do we start talking about puberty? Ideally, we start talking about puberty before it happens. And we'll talk a little bit more about when puberty happens for bodies with penises and bodies with vaginas. But typically in school, puberty conversations will start around grade 4, so age 7 or 8. Essentially, we want to start this conversation before anyone is going through any of the changes of puberty. And we'll talk about what those are again so you can kind of recognize. Ideally, we want people to be prepared so that when their feet and hands start to get bigger and longer, or when weird things start happening to their genitals, they already know or they have some idea to expect this, rather than waking up in a panic and needing to find a reliable source of information when something happens. The thing I want to reiterate here as well is that puberty is a very ongoing conversation. So puberty can happen really quickly in some kids, and it can happen very slowly over time for others. But essentially, different changes happen at different times with different sort of impacts or ramifications. And like, for example, talking about emotional regulation and this idea of like hormonal changes and the mad sads and the glads, as we say, is a bit of a different conversation with a 4th grader or a 7-year-old than it is with an 8th or 9th grader or a 12 or 13-year-old. But it's still the same foundational things. So the conversation about puberty evolves and deepens over time with your kids and with your clients. And what you kind of introduce to them and how much you explore together with them evolves over time as well. But the very basics of what is going to happen to your body and what you might want to expect should really start to happen around ages 7 to 9. Just want to look at my notes here. Yeah, so what to talk about when. I just want to note here something I didn't put on the slide is that a very important preface to puberty conversations is basic reproductive anatomy conversations. And those are things that ideally we can start talking about with kids in the preschool to grade 1 and 2 years. So I have a 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old now, and one of his absolute favorite books is the Body Book. And we talk about how boys have penises and girls have vaginas, and we talk about nipples and anuses, and we talk about private body parts and public body parts and good and bad touch. And that's really a precursor to any puberty conversation. So if you're working with a client or if you have a kid who you don't think or you're not sure that they've really been introduced to basic anatomy, and more importantly, the what we call body science words, or the scientific, anatomically correct words for their body parts, then that's a conversation that needs to happen with the puberty conversation or beforehand. So kids should know what a vulva is, what a vagina is, what an anus is. They should know what a penis is and what testicles are. And it's challenging to have a puberty conversation when you don't have those anatomy basics. So that's really important. So ages 6 to 8, so kind of grade 3, 4, 5 is when we start to, 3, 4, 5 is when we start to basically introduce the idea of what puberty is. That it's a change that's kind of coming in our bodies. And my stepson and I, we have lots of conversations about puberty and what it is. And every opportunity I have to remind him of it and just kind of bring it up, we do. 7 to 12, so getting a little bit older, is when we start to introduce all of the very specific changes that are going to happen in puberty. I'm going to talk about those later today in the meeting, in the webinar. And it's at a very high level, right? So we're giving them an introduction to all the things they can expect to happen. We're trying to make it fun and engaging. This is not necessarily the time to go into like a full-on lecture about the 28-day menstrual cycle or exactly how sperm work, but it is definitely a time to talk about why women get their periods, what the point of a period is, and more specifically to talk about what people can expect, how to prepare for them, and the different kinds of tools that people use to address these different bodily changes. So like I said, in the earlier years, we're just introducing the fact that these changes are happening. Kids love this information, especially grade 4, grade 5s, age 7, 8. They're not squirmy about it yet. They just think it's really neat. And when we frame the conversation in the sort of way of we're talking about our bodies and how cool they are and the really neat things that they do, kids get really excited about that. They're also often really excited about the idea of getting their first pimple or getting that first piece of chin hair, and they want to know about it. So giving them as much factual information as you can is really important. And then period preparation, breast development, wet dreams. You want to introduce these topics at ages 7 to 12, but certainly as it's getting closer to a girl potentially having her period, or obviously like once she's had it, you're going to go into much more in-depth conversation about her choices for management, her choices, for pain, her choices for tampons and pads, how-tos in terms of how to clean oneself and take care of oneself, etc., etc. So as you can see, these conversations kind of evolve over time, like I was saying. The other thing that we tend to kind of talk about with kids during this time is this idea that it's a big time of change for people, and that bullying and teasing, like these are things that we want to be really aware of and respectful of. I can think of like the kid with the orangutan arms and people's faces changing all of a sudden, or they're tripping all over the place, right? So changes start to happen that can be quite embarrassing, and it's also a really great time to talk with kids about kind of that social awareness piece and making sure that they know that they're not alone in what they're going through, and that they want to be really compassionate towards other kids and what they might be going through. So I hope that all makes sense. If someone can just leave me a quick note in the chat, let me know you can still hear me, we're all good, or give me a thumbs up of some kind. I just like to check in regularly and make sure that we're doing okay. All right, so perfect, thank you. Puberty 101. You may need a reminder, you may not need a reminder. We won't go massively in depth today, but I wanted to just give you a quick overview of the core changes that happen and essentially the level of conversation that I would be going into with 7, 8, 9-year-olds about what's going to be happening to their bodies. So this is when we will get started. So when does puberty happen? So a reminder for girls, this is typically they go through puberty a little bit younger, 8 to 16, so their bodies mature a little bit faster. Boys typically start around 10 to 17. Now I want to note those are the words typical. Essentially, every single person has what I call a different alarm clock in their brain, right? It's the pituitary gland. It is set to go off at a certain time, start releasing estrogen and testosterone into the body to create those changes. And the pace of change is different for everyone. So you might have a kid who goes through some massive growth spurts and gets some acne really early on, but they don't develop any erections or wet dreams or facial hair until much later. So some kids kind of go through it quick and fast. Some kids go through it much longer. Some kids, of course, go through it very late, so all of their peers have developed and they haven't grown yet, or they haven't got their period yet, or their breasts. And some kids go through it really early and they develop, breasts and periods and everything. I mean, there was a girl in my school in grade 5 who had all of that well before everyone. So the normal is that there kind of is no normal, but this is kind of the age range when you think about when you're having these conversations with your kids and your clients, and when you want to start having introducing the conversation so that kids are ready. What happens? Well, essentially there are 7 changes that are common for both sexes, and there are several that are different. So for the changes that are common to both sexes, one of the first things that tends to happen in all bodies is that the feet and the hands get larger. Everything gets bigger, but our extremities tend to grow first. So this is why we often see our kids go through huge growth spurts or changes in their shoe size. That's a very early sign of puberty. That's why you might also see hands getting bigger or arms getting longer. And that's when we get into the stage of like awkward physical movement, right? So where a kid might have used to have really good bodily control, all of a sudden they're tripping over things, they're bumping into things, and their spatial awareness has changed. And that's because the pace of their physical change is faster than their brain can kind of keep up with. So that's one of the first changes that we see. Growth spurts is kind of the next most common one. And we talk about this, how there's 4 different types of growers. So one of them is kind of the step grower. So they sort of like go up a notch, don't grow for a while, go up a notch, don't grow for a while, go up a notch, kind of like steps. The ninja growers are the ones that just sort of like slow and silently, whoop, all of a sudden the next thing you know, they're way taller. There's kids who grow very suddenly, so they're super short one day, and the next day they are way taller. And then there's what we call the turtles, and those are the kids that grow very late. Not at all. They're terrified they're going to be short and tiny forever, and then all of a sudden they explode at the very end. So those are kind of the four kind of average growth spurt sort of developmental ways. And it's helpful to talk with kids about those four different ways so they can recognize themselves. And in particular, for the turtles, that they get reassurance that, unless a doctor has told them they will never grow, they will grow at some point, and they just need to be patient with their bodies. Number 3, acne and skin changes, something I think we're all pretty familiar with, but obviously it happens to very different degrees for everybody's bodies. Essentially what happens during this phase of life is that our hormones go into overdrive, and they can produce far more oil, essentially, than we need to keep our skin moisturized. So our pores get clogged, bacteria gets caught, and then we get pimples and acne. It's common for everybody. The big thing there is just to reinforce to kids how to keep their skin clean, which is mainly just to wash with simple soap and water once, maybe twice a day, so not too much, otherwise they can be drying their face out. I'll often kind of introduce some really basic things like spot cream and like other products that are available for them to kind of explore, and certainly talk about, for some kids, if their acne is extremely painful or getting to a point where it's very hard to manage, that they certainly can open a conversation with their doctor and with their parents about it, as there are options that are available. But everybody goes through acne and skin changes, and this is a really great place to reinforce personal care. So especially when we start talking to 7, 8, 9-year-olds, they may be at a place where they bathe a couple times a week still. They may not be showering regularly. So when we talk to kids here, it's important to let them know that they need to be showering and that they need to be soaping up all parts of their body, not just their hair or not just their belly, that their soap needs to come into contact with their armpits, with their bum, with their knees, with their feet, with their face, that everything needs to be clean. And that also links to the body odor piece. So with body odor, what happens there, what we like to tell kids, is that you get a new armpit when you hit puberty. So when you hit puberty, what happens is that some new glands appear in your armpits, and they secrete this new hormone. I'm totally blanking out the name at the moment. And that hormone can have a bit of a smell when it's released. So we start to sweat more than we did when we were really little. Some of us sweat a lot, some of us don't. And sometimes that sweat can smell. So what that means is being very mindful of showering daily, especially if we are someone who sweats a lot. Changing our socks and or underwear regularly, if even a couple of times a day if we need to, if we sweat a lot, or if we've engaged in heavy physical activity. And then also letting them know that there are ways to combat it. So making sure that our armpits are clean and experimenting with antiperspirant and deodorant. And I like to kind of show, so with all of this, regardless of the kids and their experience levels, just showing them, having a bunch of sample products. This is what deodorant looks like. This is what antiperspirant looks like. There's gels, there's spray-ons. Letting them just experiment, explore them. They're not going to need this stuff at the age of 7, but it's helpful for them to start to get an awareness of it, so that it doesn't feel like this magical, strange thing. They kind of know what it is. Last 3, mads, sads, and glads. So in that one, we just like to let kids know that the hormones start to create, different changes in their body. And they can go from being super happy on the way to school to totally angry and depressed to really happy again by lunchtime. That it's really normal to just feel a lot of feelings for no reason. This is usually where we'll get into a bit of an anti-bullying conversation and talk about having compassion and empathy for others, because everybody is going through this and it can feel like a roller coaster. Also letting them know that it's really important to talk to trusted people. Talk to teachers that you trust, talk to frontline staff that you trust, talk to parents, talk to siblings that you trust about how you're feeling. And even, talking a little bit about like emotional regulation or like brainstorming things that make you feel better when you're having a bad day, all those kinds of things. But we're just really introducing that like they already know what it feels like to have emotions, but to feel even more emotional is what happens for a little while. Body hair is something that happens to everybody. So obviously we talk a little bit about where most women tend to get hair and where most men tend to get hair. And we also talk a little bit about how hair can be managed. Again, very high level in the beginning, so we let people know that there's razors and that you can shave it or not shave it. It's totally up to you. It's a personal choice. Again, we want to talk about personal hygiene. As kids get older, they may have more questions about whether they should be grooming their pubic area or whether they should be getting a bikini wax. There's all kinds of things they're going to be encountering in society. So we just want to make sure that we evolve and respond to those questions kind of as they come. But certainly in the beginning, they need to know that hair will come and that there are ways to manage it and that it is their choice to do what they would like with the hair that grows on their body. And the last piece is crushes. And again, we talk about this a little bit higher level with the kids that are 7, 8, 9. But of course, as you get into grade 8, once you get into high school, this becomes much more prevalent. So when we're talking to grade 4s, we're just letting people know that sort of how they feel about other people might change. They might start to feel a little bit weird or embarrassed around certain people. They may want to be around certain people a lot. And they might just kind of have some special feelings, and that's okay, and it's normal. And then as they get older, you can evolve this conversation more into relationships and what do healthy friendships look like, and what is dating like when you get questions like, can I go on a date with Tyrell? So those are kind of the common changes that happen to all bodies, regardless of what genitals we have. Does anyone have any questions about that so far? Those are kind of the basics of what's going on. I'll keep moving forward, but if you have any questions, go ahead and post. How and when do you explain about being in and out of the period without scaring them if they see it when we're at the bathroom? That is a very good question. Okay. We're actually going to get into periods here, but yes, so when we're talking about family members who live with us who may be seeing our tampons or in the bathroom with us while we are changing, for me, the fear factor really just is about you modeling, or like us modeling, calm and confidence around this topic, right? So if we have a family member or a child who sees some red blood in the bathroom, or, is with us while we're changing and they're quite worried about it, then that's a really great opportunity to talk a little bit more about periods and what they are. And with all of these conversations, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how to answer questions, kind of a formula for answering questions before the end of today, we really want to normalize that questions about body parts are okay. Give people the facts, and we might have to just repeat it a lot more, right? Like some of the fears or worries that folks have is that, my 10, 12-year-old daughter who's about to get her period is, intellectually about 5, so how do I make sure that she understands this, right? And the point being, it's going to happen to her, so she needs to know it's going to happen. Using communication tools that really speak to her is important, and giving yourself lots of time to have the conversation several times so that it can slowly start to kind of seep in is one of the big things, right? Because you'll sort of have the conversation once, and then there'll probably be a lot of misconceptions and like weird things that they took away from that conversation. So it's just about really inviting that conversation openly over and over and over to really talk about it. So in particular with periods, just really reinforcing that nobody's dying, nobody's hurt, nobody's punctured. They don't, we don't need to go to the hospital. This is a normal and healthy thing that happens. I'm going to share a little bit in the resources, but having visuals so you can kind of show what the inside of the woman's body looks like, why a period happens, is all sort of helpful in terms of getting people to kind of relax, right? And of course, lots of girls, we can think back to when we were about to get our periods as a woman. There's, no matter how many times people tell you about it, it can be very fearful, right? We have a lot of worries about it. Yes. Would it be the same way you would explain it to a 4-year-old kid? Absolutely. So I am a firm believer that you can't, and this is, again, we talk about it a little bit later, you can't hurt children with information. In particular, you can't hurt them with information about their bodies. They're going to take away what they're going to take away, and they're just going to ignore what they're not kind of ready for at the moment. The nice thing about teaching in the home is that we have control over how and when those conversations happen. So those conversations tend to happen kind of a little bit later in school, and there's a little bit more limitations to what the teachers can talk about. But in the home, it is totally your free reign to share as much information as you would like with your child. You can't harm them with information. And basically, the bottom line is, if they are asking, if they are curious, if they are wanting to know, then they are ready in some way to start to have that conversation with you. So yeah, if I was talking to a 4-year-old, they may not understand sort of all of the ins and outs of a period, but when I was talking about with my 6-year-old, and we started reading this book probably when he was about 5, and some people definitely would work with a 4 or 5-year-old on this, is the basic body book, where we're talking about all the different body parts, and we talk about what a uterus is, and we talk about ovaries, and we talk about basics of contraception, which is essentially that an egg from a woman and a sperm from a man come into contact, and that's how a baby is made. So very basic concepts, but totally conversations you can be having with your 4-year-old. And like I said before, when they start to understand the body parts and how they're all connected, and when they get a visual in their mind of what a uterus is and the fact that a little bit of blood comes out of it every month for good reason, then they can start to slowly put it all together. So I hope that's answered your question. I'm going to keep going here, but we are going to talk a little bit more about how to have these conversations and some resources. So just let me know if you have any more questions. So the other changes that we need to talk about with kids before they happen is the changes that are dependent on their sex. So bodies with uteruses, we tend to explain to kids that they get more estrogen, and because of that, 3 things typically happen to them that is different than bodies with penises. So their breasts will develop, and usually that conversation starts very early on with just a conversation actually about mammals and about how humans are mammals, and humans, like other mammals, feed their babies with their breasts. And so the breasts make milk for the babies, and that's how we feed them and make sure that our little babies stay healthy. So when you're talking to a young woman, you can say all women develop breasts so that one day they could feed a baby if they were to have a baby. I don't tend to explain a lot about them. There's all kinds of stuff you can get into in terms of the stages of breast development. The main thing is they will get bigger over time. There's no way to know how big they will get. It really depends on your body. There isn't anything that you can do to change that. And that when they start to feel like there's changes happening there, then they need a bra, and that's something that they can reach out to a parent. Oh no! Hold on. Pausing for a second. Kristen says we lost audio. Are we back yet? Testing, testing. Checking in to see my internet connection is still good here. We're back. Okay. Whew. My goodness. Northern challenges, right? Okay, so I'll just recap back to bodies with uteruses, go through different changes specifically related to the hormone estrogen. So we talk with girls about breast development, and specifically we have that conversation, generally speaking, in the context of mammals. And this can be a really good conversation to have with kids where you sort of explore what a mammal is compared to a bird or a lizard, how they conceive differently. Mammals all, including humans, grow hair. We all have live births, and we all feed our babies with our breasts. So this is a really neat thing for kids to kind of explore. When you talk about breast development, there's lots in the kind of more advanced puberty books for girls to read about the different stages of breast development and that kind of stuff. The biggest thing to reinforce is that, like with everything in puberty, there's no way to control how large or small our breasts will be. You can explain that what the areola is and what the nipple is and how they can be different sizes and different colors. A big part of the puberty conversation is just letting kids know that pretty much everything is normal. So their body might not look the same as their friend's body, and that's okay. It's all normal. Some people are going to have large breasts. Some people are going to have small breasts, big nipples, small nipples, etc., etc. It's all normal. If they have worries that their body isn't normal, they can always come talk to you or a trusted adult about that, or to their doctor. The other thing with breast development is just to kind of let them know that a bra is something that women typically wear as their breasts tend to grow. And so when they are noticing that they're having some changes there, they can reach out to a trusted adult to explore getting a bra and whether it's time. Hips widen and we get more curves, so that's another common thing that happens to female bodies. And periods. So for periods, like I was talking before, in a grade 7 classroom, I basically go through the basics. So I will pull up a diagram of inside of a woman's body, and we'll go through all the basic body parts. So we'll talk about the vagina, we'll talk about the uterus, we'll talk about the ovaries and the fallopian tubes. And we'll talk a little bit about how what happens in a woman's body is that every month, an egg comes out of the ovary, and it makes its way down the fallopian tube into the uterus. And if it doesn't meet a sperm, then it's not needed. And so what happens is that a little bit of blood comes out of the woman's body to kind of clean everything out. It's totally healthy. It's totally normal. And that process happens every month for a really long time. So we usually let girls know that it can start to come around age 12. We let them know that it's not painful. We let them know kind of how to manage it. And one of the big conversations to have, certainly as a girl is getting older and closer to the age of having her period, is being prepared, right? So there can be a lot of panic about, like, what if I'm out one day in my white shorts and something happens, right? And so the idea of putting together a little prep kit, so maybe she has some pads in her locker or some pads in her purse or backpack and a change of underwear so that she's as ready as she can be for the day when it happens. I also say, and this is kind of a side note, more so for parents, although it can be useful for frontline staff, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit in just a minute, is sharing your own experience about these things helps kids to relate more and to understand more and to normalize more. So letting your child know about what your experience was when you first got your period, how it felt for you, what happened for you, is a really helpful way to kind of normalize it for a child. So those are the 3 changes that girls need to know about. One quick note as well, it is very important that boys and girls know about both of these changes. So there's no reason for the girls to be pulled aside to be talking about breasts and periods and hips, and for boys to be pulled aside to talk about wet dreams and erections. Everybody should know all of the changes that are happening to all the bodies. In many ways, it's just about understanding biology and what happens, but it's also about understanding what our peers are going through as well. Excellent. So, yeah, if there's any questions about bodies with uteruses, just make a note in the chat. For bodies with penises, same kind of thing. So, obviously, we're letting them know that testosterone is the main hormone here, and it's produced by the testicles. Two of the very common things that happen is that their voice will change and deepen, so it might crack and get a little silly, and that their shoulders will widen instead of their hips, so their shoulders will get broader. And that's actually one of the last things that tends to happen for a lot of teenage boys or bodies with or folks with penises, as it doesn't happen. I remember in my school, like none of the guys really went through those changes until like the very last half of grade 12 is when they all got facial hair and their bodies kind of broadened. The two big things we really want to make sure that boys are prepared to manage is wet dreams and erections. So same as periods with erections, we're just explaining kind of the basic function of the penis and why it gets an erection. And generally, sometimes what will happen is people will say it's sort of like your body practicing for when it gets older. So what's happening when an erection happens is that blood is entering into the penis, and you can draw a little picture of the penis and show that blood enters into it, so it gets a little bit hard. It's kind of like if you were to put an elastic band around your finger, and you can see that the blood sort of stays in the finger. And it's normal sometimes for a little bit of semen to come out of the penis after the erection happens. I like to let them know, same as with women, that semen grow in the testicles and they come through this tube out the penis, that it's very normal. For erections, one of the biggest things to focus on or to talk about is the fact that they are completely spontaneous during puberty. So boys will start to get erections that they have no control over. So it's not because they had a sexy thought, it's not because they're a bad person, it's not because they're sinful or anything. Their body is just doing something completely on its own. And it may happen in embarrassing places, that's okay, it happens to a lot of other people. The big thing to do is like not to make a huge deal about it. Sit down for a few minutes until it goes away, or go to the washroom if you need to. But it's totally normal for it to happen spontaneously and very often, and it's just a part of getting older. And over time, it will stop happening that way. It's also important to talk about wet dreams, and there we're just letting them know that they sometimes may get erections in the nighttime when they're sleeping. And generally speaking, what happens is if there's too much semen in the body, a little bit of the extra will come out overnight. It's very healthy. What that means is they might wake up with a little bit of a wet spot on their underwear or in their sheets. It's no big deal. They can just clean it up themselves, or they can ask for help if they need. But it's something that happened to their dad. It's something that their mom knows about. There's no reason to be embarrassed. It's a normal part of what's going on to their body. And it's really hard to normalize some of these things and not make people feel super embarrassed about them because we have so much societal kind of taboo around the genitals. But as much as possible, we want to let them know kind of like, in this house, it's not a big deal. We can talk about these things. We can ask questions about them respectfully. And nobody's judging you for having erections because we know that, they're happening by accidents, in particular during puberty. If we're dealing with adults who are, deliberately self-pleasuring, that's a completely other conversation. But certainly during the puberty years. The other thing that I like to reinforce in all of this, and typically with a little bit older kids, so when we're talking grade 8 and up, is at home in particular, we can really start to have conversations about pleasure. We can start to have conversations about the fact that touching our bodies can feel nice. Touching our penis can feel nice, and touching our vulva can feel nice. And that's okay. We always want to reinforce that touching our bodies is okay, but it needs to happen in a private place where we're alone. That means usually our bedroom or a bathroom where the door can be locked and we can be by ourselves. But even just talking about the idea that touch in general, right? Like our bodies are made to feel nice. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be about touching our genitals, just taking care of our bodies, taking pride in our bodies, eating healthy, being healthy, getting lots of rest, that kind of stuff is all really important. And I suppose that's the last piece, actually, before I talk about how we talk about these things that I didn't mention, is certainly a big part of managing all of these changes, in particular the ones that are common to both sexes, is lots of rest, eating healthy, and taking care of our body. So exercising and washing regularly. And so it's also an opportunity to really start to introduce this idea of self-care and of taking care of one's body, and that it's important to sleep well, exercise often, eat well, and wash, and that those things keep us healthy, and they keep us happy, and they keep us balanced. All right, let me know if you've got any questions about that. Otherwise, we're going to keep rolling. We've got just a few minutes left. Hold on here. Okay, so communicating with your child or client. So we've talked about this a little bit already. 2 myths I wanted to share. One was that you can share too much information. Totally untrue. In particular, especially around puberty and even sexuality in general, you can't harm your child with information, in particular when it comes to sort of the scientific stuff. So when you're talking about how periods work, or how erections work, or how the body works in any form or way, how babies are made, conception, contraception, all that stuff, the options that are available, how you take care of certain things. These are just very factual, basic things. And kids are going to take what they're ready for. They're going to leave what they're not. And that's why it's important to just kind of have the conversations over and over and over to see how they sort of build their knowledge. But you can't hurt them with too much information, and it's never too early to start to have these conversations. You can be having conversations about anatomy with your 2 or 3-year-old when it's bath time, right? You can talk about how daddy has a penis and mommy has a vulva and a vagina. And those are great ways to just start to create comfort kind of in the home around body parts. Myth number 2 is that only parents should talk about puberty. And this is kind of more for my frontline staff, and it really depends on the situation that you're in. So my caveat here is definitely that parents who are taking an active role in their child's life, who they're living with them, etc., 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 are really some of the best educators. Kids want to know about these things from you, as much as that might seem crazy. Studies show that. They want to be in a home and a space where it's safe to ask questions about these things. And in particular, parents have the ability to filter this information through the values of your home, right? So when it comes to puberty and really all sexuality questions, there's lots of values that go into guidance around decision making. And so when parents kind of take the lead on those conversations, even when it can be challenging, it gives you the ability to shape how you talk about values around sexuality. And the other piece there is that kids are learning about this stuff from other places. They're hearing about things from other kids at school, or they're observing it as they're going through it. They might see puberty as a topic of conversation in TV shows that they're watching, or they might see it, in different books and things like that that they're accessing. And so when we have open conversations about these things, we can take control of those conversations and make sure that the information our kids are accessing is being filtered in a really good way. All children legally have the right to this information. Everyone has the right, regardless of ability, to understand their body and to be able to make decisions about their body, which is why this information starts getting shared at school. So puberty lessons usually start around grade 4, grade 5. If you are a parent or a caregiver, it's really important to check and see that that information is being taught at school. Often I find in particular resource rooms can shy away from this. They're not sure how to broach the topic, or they're concerned about it. So they just don't teach it. And it's part of the curriculum. It's supposed to be taught. And it's very important that it is taught, because if it's not being taught and it's not being taught at home, then our kids are missing out. So having those conversations with your teachers, with your schools, to make sure that you know what sex ed curriculum is being taught, what puberty curriculum is being taught, and that it is happening is also really important. As frontline staff, it really depends on the situation that you're in with a child. If you are a primary caregiver or a foster parent even, or you've got a child who's living in a home in care, or maybe you're just working with someone who lives with their parents on a day-to-day basis, then there's a couple different nuances there, right? So if you're working with someone who is living with their family and they're just kind of in your care on a day-to-day basis, I would highly encourage you to have a conversation with the parents about what to do when questions about puberty and bodies and relationships come up. Think of it as inevitable. You may at some point get a question about body parts or crushes or why people shave or whatever. And you can have a conversation with the family about what's being taught, what messages they would like to reinforce, and or how they would like you to address that. And maybe the answer is, if the question comes up, acknowledge it, let us know, and let them know that they can ask mommy and daddy. And that's a really great way to go. Or it might be, yeah, absolutely go ahead, crack a book open and take a look at things. So really checking in with family members about their preferences around that is really important. If you are more in a role where you are providing primary care for a child who is not really in a relationship with their parents, then I absolutely believe, and this is kind of my opinion, that institutions and caregivers need to be taking a lead role on this. If a child is in our care, they need to know about their bodies and they need to know how to get ready for these changes, and it is our responsibility to make sure that they have it. And so in that case, absolutely, it's your opportunity to initiate conversations about these topics and to let the child know that you are open and available to answering those questions, or that someone else in your agency is. So oftentimes we may feel uncomfortable entering into this conversation, but we need to then provide an alternative resource to the kids and the family members that we're working with. So it's really everyone's job to be talking about this stuff as much as possible. So handling questions. What do we do? There's basically a 3-part framework that we can use, and this is true for all sexuality conversations. We talked about it a bit before, so the first thing is just normalize and validate the question. That is everyone's job, whoever gets the question. That's a great question. A lot of people want to know that. So you want to let them know it is totally okay to ask these things. It's totally normal to ask these things, and you can ask me these things. The second part is to answer honestly. So focus on the facts if you know them. If you don't know them, tell them you don't know them. You know what? I can't quite remember how periods work. Let's look it up together. And maybe you find some books together or some videos that you can look at. Or if you feel uncomfortable asking the question, you can say, you know what? Maybe you're a male caregiver working with female staff and you don't feel comfortable talking about periods. You can say, you know what? I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, but let's connect you with someone else who can. And that's definitely the answer in any position. If you're feeling uncomfortable talking about something, shutting down the question is not a great approach, but encouraging it and saying, let's find someone else who can answer this for you, or asking the child to think about who they could ask. I'm not the right person to ask this, but could you talk to your mom or dad about that? Or could you talk to your teacher? Could you talk to Miss So-and-so? So encouraging them to think about the resources in their life is also really important. And then to close, you just want to check in. Did that answer your question? Did I give you the information that you were looking for? Do you need more? And that's kind of your simple 3-part formula. So for anyone who's kind of parenting or caregiving for preteens, definitely encourage you to get some puberty books and read them and see kind of what's typically taught. Familiarize yourself so that you can answer those questions, or have those resources around so that you can explore together with your child or your client. In terms of resources, we've got 3 more minutes here, so let me know if you have any questions. Obviously, I am available anytime, so you can always call the YACL or you can email me, Sophia@ycommunityliving.com. If you have a question about a particular situation, you're not sure how to deal with it, or you're looking for some specific books for your age level, do let me know. A couple of resources for older kids would be Wellcast, which is a YouTube channel, or amaze.org. They have amazing resources, videos that go through all of the topics. And books. There are so many out there. Tons. A couple of really good ones that I recommend, in particular for younger kids, so even like before 6, before we're talking about puberty, is a book called Boys, Girls, and Body Science by Meg Hickling. Boys, Girls, and Body Science by Meg Hickling. That is a great body book. My stepson and I, he just loves it. It goes through the basics of anatomy and starts to kind of pave the way for kids. The other one is called What's the Big Secret? That's another one that's for younger kids, that's kind of about reproduction as well as the basic body parts. And then there's a whole series of books. You can get one called It's So Amazing, a book about eggs, sperm, birth, babies, and families. And there's others specifically about puberty. But books are a great way to, typically you could just bring them into your nighttime reading and notice if they become a family favorite. They're a great way, again, to normalize and be like, we read books about bodies and we read books about forest animals. But it's a great way to make it positive, and again, to sow the seeds of, raising your child or supporting your client to feel connected to their body, to understand their body, and to mostly know that there's a trusted adult in their life that they can talk to about these things. And those are really, they're connected to self-esteem, they're connected to mental well-being, and they're very much connected to abuse prevention. The more kids know about their bodies, the less likely they are to be victimized. That is all the time I have for today. There are my contact info if you are looking to get in touch. Thank you for joining us. Super excited. I hope that I gave you some support in talking to your 4-year-old, and reach out anytime. But the main thing with all of this is just to be open. These are facts. These are bodies. This is how they work. There's no reason to be embarrassed or frightened about it. I will see you next month. I'm not sure what we're doing next week, so I'll see you next month for our next webinar. You can always check out hsyukon.com for the link. And I will be posting this live, this video on our website. So if you want to access it again, share it, then please do. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.